And another thing, grand jury. I have presented to grand juries so many times, I can't even count them. On a single day, we would present 75 to 150 cases to a grand jury, and we would do that 2 times a week when I had grand jury duty. I feel that the district attorney, as much as I respect him in other ways, used the grand jury to do what he wanted them to do as his tool. He didn't want to drop it. He presented it in such a way that this grand jury would not bring charges, and I don't like that.
Just before Officer Darren Wilson testified to the grand jury investigating his killing of Michael Brown, the assistant district attorney handling the case said this to the grand jurors. I'm going to pass out to you all. You are all going to receive a copy of a statute. It is section 563046, and it says law enforcement officers' use of force in making an arrest, and it is the law on what is permissible, what force is permissible, and when in making an arrest by a police officer. The assistant district attorney, Kathy Alizadeh, then handed the grand jury a copy of a 1979 Missouri law that was ruled unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court in 1985. She was handing them something that had not been law in Missouri during her entire legal career. But it was very helpful to Officer Darren Wilson that the assistant district attorney handed the grand jury an old unconstitutional law which said incorrectly that it is legal to shoot fleeing suspects simply because they are fleeing. By handing the grand jury that unconstitutional law, the assistant district attorney dramatically lowered the standard by which Darren Wilson could be judged. She was telling the grand jury with that document that Darren Wilson had the right, the legal right, to shoot and kill Michael Brown as soon as Michael Brown started running away from him. She was telling the grand jury that Darren Wilson didn't have to feel his life threatened at all by Michael Brown. She was taking the hurdle that Darren Wilson had to get over in his testimony and flattening it. She was making it impossible for Darren Wilson to fail in front of this grand jury. She was doing all of that by handing the grand jury a so-called law that has never been the law of Missouri during her entire legal career. The portion of the Missouri law that was ruled unconstitutional says that a police officer is justified in the use of such physical force as he or she reasonably believes is immediately necessary to effect the arrest or prevent the escape from custody. That was ruled unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court in 1985. It was legal to shoot and kill fleeing suspects in most states until the Supreme Court made it illegal in 1985, and everyone in law enforcement knows that, everyone except the 2 assistant district attorneys who were presenting the evidence to the grand jury in one of the most important cases of police use of deadly force in this country since 1985. There is nothing more helpful the assistant district attorney could have done for Officer Darren Wilson right before his testimony than show that incorrect, outdated, unconstitutional law to the grand jury. The grand jury then listened to Officer Wilson's testimony with the belief that anything he did to Michael Brown would be fully justified legally simply because Michael Brown at some point ran away from Officer Wilson. The grand jury listened to the officer's testimony believing that according to the law, Michael Brown did not have to pose any kind of threat to Officer Wilson to justify Officer Wilson shooting him dead. Weeks after Officer Wilson testified, several weeks after that, just as the grand jury was about to consider what charges they might vote for, the assistant district attorney, Kathy Alizadeh, knew that she had better amend the record of these proceedings by introducing to the grand jury the real law, the accurate law on police use of deadly force in Missouri. And so she told the grand jury, Previously, in the very beginning of this process, I printed out a statute for you that was the statute in Missouri for the use of force to effect an arrest. So if you all want to get those out, what we have discovered, and we have been going along with this, doing our research, is that the statute in the state of Missouri does not comply with the case law. This doesn't sound probably unfamiliar to you, that the law is codified in a written form in books, and they're called statutes, but courts interpret those statutes, and so the statute for the use of force to effect an arrest in the state of Missouri does not comply with the United States Supreme Court cases. So the statute I gave you, if you want to fold that in half, just so that you don't necessarily rely on that, because there is a portion of that that doesn't comply with the law. She then handed out to the grand jury a new document explaining the law on police officers' use of force, and then said, that does correctly state what the law is on when an officer can use force and when he can use deadly force in effecting an arrest. Okay? I don't want you to get confused, and don't rely on that copy or that print out of the statute that I've given you a long time ago. It is not entirely incorrect or inaccurate, but there is something in it that's not correct. Ignore it totally. A grand juror then asked, the Supreme Court, federal court, overrides Missouri statutes? Now, we all learned the answer to that in high school. It is one word: yes. That is why we no longer have segregated schools in this country. The Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional and illegal to have segregated schools, and that is the only reason states like Mississippi and Alabama and Arkansas, and yes, Missouri, no longer have segregated schools. But the assistant district attorney, when asked the simplest question she could possibly be asked by a grand juror, does the Supreme Court override Missouri statutes, couldn't bring herself to say a simple, truthful yes. Instead, she actually said, quote, just don't worry about that. Her full reply, word for word, was, as far as you need to know, just don't worry about that. The other assistant district attorney in the room added, we don't want to get into a law class.
Witness 40 is a woman by the name of Sandra McElroy, and the Smoking Gun did an investigative report on who Sandra McElroy is. Keep in mind that she's a key witness that totally had testimony that lined up with what Darren Wilson said. So let us give you the details of what she said and what her history is with race relations and mental illnesses. So she had said the following, according to the Smoking Gun. The unarmed teenager, she recalled, gave Wilson a "what are you going to do about it" look, and then, quote, bent down in a football position and began to charge at the officer. Brown, she added, looked like he was on something. As Brown rushed Wilson, McElroy said, the cop began firing. The grunting teenager, McElroy recalled, was hit with a volley of shots, the last of which dove Brown face first into the roadway.
Okay, so here's a woman who pops out of the woodworks. I mean, gives a perfect description to corroborate Officer Wilson, and then is used all over Fox News. Witness 40, witness 40, witness 40. It's over. Witness 40 said just like Darren Wilson said. So obviously all the people in the community who saw it otherwise were lying. All the witnesses were lying because we have witness 40. Turns out witness 40 is a well-known fraud.
She is a well-known fraud, and if you guys don't believe us, you don't have to. We're about to give you all the evidence indicating that she is a fraud. Now, before we get to all of that, though, just keep in mind that in the past, she has involved herself in other high-profile cases with the St. Louis Police Department, and the cops realized that all of her testimony was a complete and utter fabrication. Okay, on 2 different instances she did this. Cops determined it was a fabrication. Nonetheless, they decided to use her in this case and have her testify in front of the grand jury. Now, according to the Smoking Gun, While the hands-up account of Dorian Johnson is often cited by those who demanded Wilson's indictment, Witness 40's testimony about seeing Brown batter Wilson and then rush the cop like a defensive end has repeatedly been pointed to by Wilson supporters as directly corroborative of the officer's version of the August 9 confrontation, meaning that her testimony was really important. Now, Witness 40, a 45-year-old St. Louis resident named Sandra McElroy, was nowhere near Canfield Drive on the Saturday afternoon Brown was shot to death.
So understand why this is incredible negligence if they actually wanted to indict Wilson, right? McCullough, the prosecutor, takes her word that she magically, even though she didn't live in the neighborhood, lived nowhere near the neighborhood, and was a well-known liar to the cops and prosecutors, happened to show up on that same street at the exact time that Brown was being shot.
Right.
Who could possibly believe that unless you wanted to present false testimony?
Now, she had changed her story as to why she was there when this all went down. First, she said, oh, well, I was visiting an old friend from school. And then later on, she admitted that she likes to go to predominantly black areas because she doesn't like black people and she's trying to figure them out so she can stop referring to them as the N-word.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So she was on an expedition to find the N-words and find out if they're not so bad, when it turns out she found one charging at a decent cop who got shot and happened to be the main witness. What a stroke of luck. It turns out they are the N-word after all. Look at what she found.
Here's some more information for you guys. McElroy waited 4 weeks after the shooting to contact cops. By the time she gave St. Louis police a statement on September 11th, a general outline of Wilson's version of the shooting had already appeared in the press. McElroy's account of the confrontation dovetailed with Wilson's reported recollection of the incident. Wow.
They have uncovered who Witness 40 is at the Ferguson grand jury trial, and that person's name is Sandra McElroy, pictured right here, and now it's been picked up by the New York Daily News here as well. This is an outrage. She was exposed as a racist, mentally ill felon who lied about the shooting. The woman that Sean Hannity was quoted as saying saw Michael Brown charge at Officer Darren Wilson like a football player, saw absolutely nothing, and is described as a mentally ill woman who used the N-word to describe blacks and previously lied to police about witnessing a high-profile crime. And yet, get this, yet she was allowed to be a witness on the grand jury at Ferguson, even though she was likely not there and was a known outspoken backer of Officer Darren Wilson.
One described his movement toward Officer Wilson as a full charge.
That was District Attorney Bob McCullough last night mentioning the only witness who he thought worthy of quoting in his nationally televised announcement of no indictment. No other witness was singled out by the prosecutor. That witness, identified in the grand jury and police reports as witness number 10, is the only witness whose description of Michael Brown's movements agrees with Officer Wilson's description completely. Without that one witness to corroborate Darren Wilson's description of Michael Brown's movements, Darren Wilson might not be a free man tonight. That's how important that witness was. That's why the prosecutor cited him individually last night. For the prosecutor to lean that heavily on that one witness, witness number 10, must be the most consistent and credible of the eyewitnesses, right? Witness number 10 must not be one of those witnesses who changed his story or got things wrong.
Eyewitness accounts must always be challenged and compared against the physical evidence. Many witnesses to the shooting of Michael Brown made statements inconsistent with other statements they made and also conflicting with the physical evidence.
So witness number 10 must have survived that challenge by the investigators and the district attorney. As an example of how this grand jury investigation actually worked, let's examine the credibility of this one crucial eyewitness, the only one who agrees with Darrell Wilson's full description of Michael Brown's movements after the confrontation at the police car. Witness number 10's police interview just 2 days after the killing of Michael Brown, when his memory was fresh, begins with the detective saying, "Would you just retell your account of what took place?" Retell, of course, means he already told his story at least once to the police without being recorded. So there is no way of knowing just how consistent his police statement, which is at least his second statement, is with whatever his unrecorded first statement was. Witness number 10 was working in the neighborhood, and he begins his story to the police with, "I seen the two young guys walking down the street on the same sidewalk that I was on." 6 weeks later, witness number 10 testified to the grand jury and changed his story about where Michael Brown was walking. He said under oath to the grand jury, "I seen Mike Brown and his friend walking down the street closer to the curb, not on the sidewalk." By that time, the basic fact that Michael Brown and his friend Dorian Johnson were walking in the middle of the street had become well known. It was the very reason Officer Wilson stopped to confront them. The police and Michael Brown's friend Dorian Johnson agreed that Michael Brown and Dorian Johnson were walking in the middle of the street. And witness number 10, who said they were walking on the same sidewalk with him 6 weeks ago, changed his testimony to, "They were walking down the street closer to the curb, not on the sidewalk." That is the kind of thing the district attorney was complaining about last night. Witnesses changing their stories to fit the publicly known facts. Here is why witness number 10 was the most important witness to appear in Darren Wilson's defense. This is what he described Michael Brown doing when Officer Wilson got out of the car and chased him. Michael Brown stopped. He did turn. He did some sort of body gesture. I'm not sure what it was, but I know it was a body gesture. I could say for sure he never put his hands up after he did his body gesture. He ran towards the officer full charge. So there's witness number 10 saying the magic words. He never put his hands up and he ran towards the officer full charge. In the grand jury, when the prosecutor asked witness number 10 to describe what he called a body gesture, he said, "I can't say for sure what sort of body gesture. I cannot fully recall. All I know is it was not in a surrendering motion of I'm surrendering, putting my hands up or anything. I'm not sure if it was like a shoulder shrug or him pulling his pants up. I'm not sure." So there's the district attorney's favorite witness, the only one he quoted last night, saying, "I cannot fully recall. I'm not sure. I'm not sure," within the body of an answer in which the only thing he's absolutely sure of is that Michael Brown did not do a surrendering motion. In a real courtroom, when a witness begins his answer with, "I can't say for sure," and then in the body of his answer he says, "I cannot recall fully," and then says, "I am not sure" twice within that same answer, that witness observation does not survive cross-examination. But there was no cross-examination in the grand jury room. This is about as challenging as the prosecutor got with witness number 10. Question, let me ask you this. How is your vision? Witness number 10, pretty good. Question, do you wear glasses or contacts? Witness number 10, no. He was not then asked, when was your last eye examination? Have you ever in your life had your eyes examined? We have no idea how old this witness is. Is witness number 10 in his 60s or 70s and watching this without needing eyeglasses? Is he in his 20s? We have no idea. But we do know how good his eyes have to be to offer the grand jury the precise observations he did. In his police interview 2 days after the killing of Michael Brown, he was asked how far away he was from the action that he was watching, and he said, quote, "To guess, maybe 100 yards, I would say." maybe less. So the district attorney's favorite witness, the most effective witness for the defense of Officer Wilson, told the police that he saw everything clearly, without eyeglasses, from 100 yards away. Stop. Think about that. There's a football field with the referee on one goal line and the action he is judging 100 yards away at the other goal line. Who among you would trust the judgment of that referee standing on one goal line 100 yards away from the action at the other goal line? Anyone who's ever seen a football game, as we can assume the district attorney of St. Louis County has, would not put much faith in the observations of a referee who was 100 yards away from the play. And witness number 10 is the most important referee of what happened in the killing of Michael Brown, as far as the district attorney is concerned. He made that clear last night, quoting only witness number 10. How far away was witness number 10 is the most important credibility point we need to know in evaluating his testimony. 6 weeks after saying he was 100 yards away watching the action, he was asked in the grand jury room under oath how far away he was when he was from what he was watching, and he said, "I would give it 50 to 75 yards." He cut the distance in half to 50 yards just like that. He did that under oath before a grand jury who had no idea that the last time he was asked that question 2 days after the shooting, he said double that. He said 100 yards. And no prosecutor in that grand jury room put his police interview transcript in front of him and asked him if he remembered saying 100 yards instead of 50 yards. No prosecutor in that room let the grand jury know that witness number 10 was changing his story under oath about how far away from the action he was.
Eyewitness accounts must always be challenged and compared against the physical evidence. Many witnesses to the shooting of Michael Brown made statements inconsistent with other statements they made and also conflicting with the physical evidence.
Bob McCullough, St. Louis County Prosecutor, are you there?
I am.
Why did you allow people to testify in front of the grand jury in which you knew their information was either flat out wrong or flat out lying or just weren't telling the truth?
Well, early on, I decided that anyone who claimed to have witnessed anything was going to be presented to the grand jury. And I knew that no matter how I handled this, there'd be criticism of it. And so if I didn't put those witnesses on, then we'd be discussing now why I didn't put those witnesses on, even though, even though their statements were not accurate. there was some that we missed, and that was pointed out to me by Channel 5, a report they did, in which, frankly, they had an awful lot of stuff just plain wrong. But they corrected that and apologized for that. But they did point out that we had not released some of the FBI statements, or at least Dorian Johnson. So I went back and we gathered that information, and we did, in fact, we missed about a dozen. It's not that we didn't have them; it's just that in getting everything ready, we neglected to release those or include those in the original release.